Chataya, John and Mark?
Yes. So I'm not going to introduce myself again. This is another presentation that we want to discuss. Actually, let it be a non-formal brainstorming about like what is happening with these EU regulations and how to see the big picture, like how they are going to affect our market. So I promise I'm not going to speak that much this time, and I have two British accents here, John and Mark. Mark, we can start with you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, good morning. My name's Mark Acton. I'm here representing a company called EchoSense. I've actually been involved in some of the stakeholder discussions with the European Commission, both for CSRD and EED. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of insight about what they're trying to do and where they're going. Happy to answer questions on that, make it interactive, but I think, Chataya, just bring me in and sort of quiz me as it goes along. Yeah, thank you.
And John?
So it's John Summers. I am a colleague of Chataya, so I'm scientific lead in data centers. So we let the data do the talking. We throw the opinion out of the window, and it's all about the data. So and they want to collect data, don't they? The Energy Efficiency Directive. I'm not sure what they're going to do with it, but maybe we'll find out from Mark. Yeah.
I'm not sure they do.
So no, I will be here. I think this works as well. Mark, we are all confused. Can you just let us know what's happening? What happened really? What kind of regulations that we are facing?
Okay, well, there's two distinct sets of regulations that have come in that we are now, within Europe, we need to address. First one is CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. That is actually largely based on the EU Code of Conduct that Chatay had up in his last presentation. That's a set of 160 plus best practices, which if you initiate them, will save you money in your data center operations in various different ways. That was converted into an assessment framework. It was referenced in the EU taxonomy, and it tells us what we should be doing in reference to CSRD. Are the Commission going to police CSRD? No, they're not. What they're going to do is they're going to ask sustainable funds to not provide sustainable funding unless people have completed a CSRD reporting, completed their CSRD reporting. They are therefore effectively leaving it up to the investment community to police this for them. And the stick, if you like, or the carrot, whichever way you look at it, is the fact that you will or will not get access to cheap money. So that's what's happening. That's already in effect. We need to do the reporting. The reporting is largely standards-based, based on the ISO 30134 series. And if you haven't heard of it, you should have done, and make sure you look it up and use it. The second thing, EED, is actually run by a separate DG within the Commission. So are they connected together? No, they're not. Are they contradictory? No, they're not. They are supporting, but they are completely separate initiatives. EED, Energy Efficiency Directive, the reporting period has already started. So your reporting is due September this year. Hopefully that sends a bit of an alarm bell to those who haven't heard of it. Exactly. So what have you got to report on? Again, what they're doing largely, not explicitly, but largely they're basing the reporting on the metrics which are defined in the ISO 30134 series. That includes PUE, WUE, ERF, so energy reuse factor, renewable energy factor, REF, so how much of your energy is actually being, excuse me, sourced from renewable sources. So there are these metrics out there which we're using. And one of the really interesting ones, and probably the most challenging one, is the fact that for co-location operators, they're requiring the co-location operators reference a KPI called ITEU, which is the IT utilization factor. This is for colos. To bear in mind, the colos have no real responsibility over what's going on the IT side. So it's going to be interesting. The Commission, I think, are on a journey. Have I got enough time? Am I taking too long?
You go on.
Sorry, I get a bit passionate about this one. The Commission, I think, are on a journey. They are well aware that what they've asked us to do is a little bit woolly. They are telling us that they're going to ask us to report on a standards basis, i.e. a level playing field. You know, we're not going to be able to game PUE or WUE because it's going to be required that we report against standards. Interesting, actually, ED, they're not requiring PUE, they're actually requiring the numbers, your incoming, basically, utility billing number, your incoming KWH, kilowatt hours, versus what you actually supply to the IT side. So, you know, they're kind of almost trying to avoid you gaming the number because they're going to try and go back as far as possible to the core data. Back to John's point, use the data, right? Are they going to be penalising us this year or next year? Probably not. Probably not. They're on a journey. This is very much the thin end of the wedge. What they're doing is they're collecting data. They will then adjust the regulation, the EED regulation, according to the data they see. This is my final piece on this. There was a direct quote from one of the policy officers involved in this, a lady called Laura Bulker. She said it took us 15 years to regulate the glassblowing industry. And you're all going, what on earth has that got to do with data centres? And she said exactly the same thing. I know, I get it, you know, I know you don't understand what I'm talking about, but she said, it's an energy-intensive industry. We don't know who's doing it. We don't know where they're doing it. And we don't know how much energy they're consuming to do it. So she said it took us 15 years to regulate that industry. I'll leave the rest up to you. John?
Well, it is about the data, isn't it? And I guess a data center is already in a good position to collect the data. But to your point about the PUE, I mean, I get annoyed about these things. They're not really sustainability metrics, are they? You know, because they only capture one aspect of sustainability. I mean, we can talk a lot about that. I mean, obviously, the use of water in water, but it depends where you are, whether you're in a water stress area or not a water stress area. It depends on the impact, the environmental impact of that. Well, let's go to the PUE you like talking about. PUE, you love it. Yeah. The problem is, yeah, so if they're going to take, where do you measure the IT power draw? Because if you want to game this, you give the commission the actual IT power at the furthest away from the IT, because then you're not giving them all of the losses in your system. So you have no idea what systems you've got, what power distribution you've got from that. So you measure it at the UPS, and then they can look at the PUE. Yeah.
If I can interject, and the best way to make your PUE look really good is go and hire a load bank from Rent-A-Load and stick it on the back of the UPS. You'll consume a lot more kilowatt hours and it'll cost you a fortune, but your PUE will be great.
So the question is what do they want the PUE for? I mean, we know that we've mandated some geographical locations against PUE. I guess that's against design PUE, isn't it? Before you actually build out the, and then design PUE is never the PUE you actually get when you're in operation. You know, there's a lot of other factors to consider in this. But again, you know, the heat recovery, the energy reuse factor, you know, that's the amount of the energy that is. And there are, if you look at the isometrics that you mentioned, I mean, whenever we talk about PUE, we should put ISO in front of it to say that we followed the ISO.
ISO 3014-2. That defines PUE. Anything else is not.
But the energy reuse factor is a bit of a tricky one. So I think, you know, I mean, we talked about this. I mean, we probably will talk about this at the heat reuse panel discussion today. I don't know whether Jaime is in the room, but it's a big topic in Europe to reuse the heat from data centers. But of course, if you start mandating against PUE, and you are an owner-operator and you have heat pumps to upgrade the heat, to get the heat across your boundary, then your PUE is basically screwed a little bit because you've got a mechanical cooling in the loop. But then the other factor of that is if you're giving the heat to a heat network and they're upgrading the heat for their heat network, for example, they provide you cooling back. And we had a discussion about this. The PUE says that if you're getting cooling across the boundary, if it's coming from a facility provider, you have to factor that in your PUE calculation. But I don't think anybody's done that. And you looked at this as well. And so it's not a level playing field when you start. And so these metrics really are a pile of rubbish, really, at the end of the day. Well, it's supposed to drive internally what you're supposed to be doing, isn't it?
I mean, they're not perfect, John. I will concede that. They're not perfect. But I think it gives us a direction of travel. And I think it hopefully produces a somewhat more level playing field than we've had in the past. At least we can reference those standards and we can audit against them. So, you know, the idea is that it does away with a certain degree of greenwashing, etc. So, yes, they're not perfect, but I think they're better than nothing.
But actually also we are here today because during one of my meetings, I received a fantastic question. The question was, yes, now there is Energy Efficiency Directive and there is the sustainability indicators. So are we climate neutral now? And I was like, no, we are not even close. So why we are tracking that? So let me go to the next slide. So I'm a bit confused. What's happening? Like, yes, this is a system level approach, and that's really great that we have some insights about how we are doing. So I accept it. And I'm really happy that we are not only building our data center on one PUE KPI. So I'm happy, I'm amused, but what's happening, like, so if we consider like our environmental performance into different scopes, so basically in this equation, John, my first question is to you. We have a lot of dependencies, and especially we have a lot of dependencies on the grid. So in this schematic, like with these KPIs, how would you compare the performance of a data center in a really environmental friendly grid and with a non-environmental friendly grid? Like, or efficiency, the KPIs, does it matter in this case?
That's a really hard question too. I mean, move all your data centers to a zone where you've got low carbon impact electricity. Yeah, I mean, perhaps we should be doing batch computing. Yeah, I mean, if it's not transactional, well, you don't need the latency. You don't have to deal with the latency. You put non-transactional workloads in a low carbon grid, low carbon intensity grid. But I think, you know, we need to have a level playing field here with that, you know, depending on how you generate your electricity, you know. And the grids are, I think it's well defined now, isn't it, that the carbon intensity of the grid. I mean, maybe it's, so when you're using, for example, wind, you're using the environment, which is, you know, basically it's the sun at the end of the day, so solar, wind, or whatever, to generate electricity. It's not emitting carbon, yes, but there is an embedded carbon, and that has to be factored into the energy generation. So you can't say it's zero carbon. I mean, climate neutrality or carbon neutral is a bit of a difficult one. And then, of course, the IPCC, it's the Paris Agreement, the COP20, I can't remember which one it was, 2015, they said, oh, we can't really do this like this. We have to talk about something else, which is called net zero. But net zero is not zero. It's about, you know, you emit carbon. The whole infrastructure is carbon intense. We know that. Everything we do emits carbon, or it has a carbon intensity. So it's about offsetting that. And of course, you know, that we're in this debacle now and I think it's greenwashing, to be honest. I mean, we're all trying to offset, but you know, even when you take airlines, the first thing, you know, when you get to the end of your booking, do you want to offset your carbon? You know, I mean, where does that money go and what does it do? Is it really the right way to go? You know, I mean, Bhutan is actually carbon neutral. The reason is that they actually are biologically sequestering the carbon that they emit. It's a small country. It's sitting on a huge amount of minerals, but they haven't mined those minerals. It won't be long before China or somebody else gets in there and starts mining it. But the thing is that the carbon that they emit is absorbed by biological sequestration. We have to maybe sequester, and this geologically sequester, which means capturing the carbon out of the atmosphere somehow and putting it back in the ground. We don't want it in the ocean. We don't want it in the atmosphere. We want it back in the ground. That's the idea here. And 2021. Globally, we sequestered 40 megatons of carbon, but we emitted 40 gigatons. So we got a long way to go. But this industry is not this is not the savior. I mean, there are other intensive industries that are carbon intensive that really need to be focused on. It's just that this industry seems to be getting a lot of attention because of because of the hype around maybe all the activities that we've got
But
going.
in this case, Mark, do you think EED or level, next versions of the regulations, are they going to focus? I acknowledge they took a great step, but are they going to acknowledge or drive to a wider spectrum of the efficiency, or what we should expect next?
Absolutely. No, we know they are. As I said earlier, they're collecting data. The EED is a first step, possibly part of a 15-year program. And EEDs are the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's not the Sustainability Directive, so it is a core focus. And I think also, when we talk about sustainability, I think it's very easy to forget that, we've got Scope 2 and Scope 3. The Scope 2 is the use phase. The Scope 3, as John suggested, is the embodied phase. It's what's actually embodied in products when they're either extracted from the ground or created. We're not even doing Scope 2 very well at the moment. Let's get Scope 2 right before we spend too much time killing ourselves over Scope 3. Scope 3 is all about the supply chain. How much of that information is really, truly available, and how accurate is it really? How many different ways are there of calculating your embodied carbon, your Scope 3? So I think the onus is on us as an industry to manage our Scope 2, manage our operational phase as far as possible, and hope or pressure our supply chain to give us more accurate information on Scope 3 so we can push back on that and make sure that we are reducing the amount of embodied carbon. And that's the only way we're going to get to true sustainability.
But in this case, Mark, I have a counter question to you. We know that the current studies show that the edge computing investments, they are in megawatt scales right now, like in aggregation hubs, closer to populations. So in this phase, they are in scope of EED, and we also know that coolant is one of the greatest power consumption items in data centers. So is this system, is it fair for data centers? Yeah, we publicly disclose this data, but what about a data center in Luleå versus a data center in Turkey? How we will compare them? Is it a fair comparison?
Well, there's a reason that there's a lot more data center activity in the UK right now. Let me put it like that. Maybe, and I'm not a Brexiteer, let me stress this, but maybe one of the very few silver linings in Brexit is that we're no longer being covered by CSRD and ED. So slightly controversial comment, I accept. But I think it's interesting we talk about edge. What's edge? How do we really define edge? Edge is, I think, a bit of a marketing term, isn't it? But if you consider that EED is currently only looking at data centers greater than 500 kilowatts IT load, then, are people going to shift their loads into edge data centers that are 450 kilowatts and go below the radar and hide? Possibly. It may happen. I don't know. But actually, the Commission are aware of this. So actually, the original threshold was 100 kilowatts of IT load. They only moved it up to 500 kilowatts because they realised they'd be deluged with data they couldn't handle, frankly, and nobody's going to report it anyway. But in 3 years, they are talking about dropping it down to 200 kilowatts. So again, we're on this journey. How will it affect edge? I don't know. I mean, I'm being slightly controversial. It might drive people to the edge. It might actually encourage the use of lots and lots of small, inefficient data centers. Who knows? You know what it's like when you introduce regulation. There are always going to be some unintended consequences, and I think they're figuring it out. And one of the reasons that it is so woolly at the moment is they didn't want to break the industry. They didn't want to penalise us. They realised that as an industry, we're desperately important to economies, not just in Europe, but clearly around the globe. So they didn't want to break it, but they are nudging us in a direction. There's no question.
John, in this...
We may want to open it up here.
Yeah, sure.
I think we've identified the rock stars of data center sustainability. We've packed the house here. So I think we may want to open it up for questions from the audience with the last few minutes.
You mentioned one of the metrics included IT utilization efficient. Yes. Could you speak a little bit more about what underpins that?
Well, I don't really. I'm not an IT guy. I put my hand up and say I'm sort of more of a building guy. It's measuring what it's intended to do, and I can't give you the true calculation because, again, it's not really my sort of area of expertise. But what it's trying to do is overcome the situation where we have an awful lot of IT equipment sitting in data centers that's effectively running idle but still consuming energy. You know, it's a horribly inefficient way to do things. And we know why we do it. You know, we knew it so we can burst in terms of increasing workload, demand, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I am sure, and the Commission are equally sure, there's a better way to do it. Rather than having a whole, maybe 50% of the estate sitting there idle, consuming 90% of the power, but doing absolutely nothing, that's just simply highly inefficient. So that's what they're trying to achieve. And what they're asking us to do, and again, I can't give the actual details on it, what they're asking us to do is give the levels of utilisation that the IT equipment is actually experiencing over an annual period. That's the intention. How they're measuring it, I'm sorry, dare I say, go and buy the standard and read it, because it's probably beyond my skill set. But that's what they're trying to do. There's also another one, ITEE, which is all about server energy efficiency, which is based on spec power broadly. So that's another one. They haven't requested that yet, but they probably will over time. But I think the interesting thing is that they recognise that it's not the data centre that's the problem. It's not the data centre itself doesn't consume energy. It's the IT load inside the data centre that consumes the energy. So what they're trying to do is bring together the kind of the building piece. Again, rather than just focusing on PUE or WE, they're trying to bring the IT component in and make sure that that is factored in as part of an overall energy efficiency picture. But I hope that gives you enough.
Hi, thank you. Hi. So we're talking about the stick here, right? Regulation. The stick works, but it's not. You cannot only have a stick. And you've talked a little bit about the carrot. Can you talk a little bit more what actually the EU wants to do in terms of carrot?
Good.
Well, the problem is it's got to be divulged down to the member states, isn't it, at the end of the day? It's not the EU that will do that. I mean, I think that taxation, for example, already in the Nordics, there's divergence there. Is if you're reusing your heat, you can get some tax incentive in one country, but you can't in another country. But perhaps you've got more to say about that, Mark.
I'm not sure the Commission really know at the moment. Again, they're on the start of a journey, which is all about data collection. Once they have data, I think they'll start to consider how they can probably incentivise both with the stick and the carrot. I can't give you a solution, but as John suggests, maybe reduction in taxation, reduction in carbon taxation if you're demonstrating good behaviour. Certainly with CSRD, it's access to cheap money. If you're not doing the right thing and reporting it, then you won't get access to sustainable funding, which is cheap money. So that's the carrot on that one. EED, I think, is a little bit more obscure. If they're not very careful, they do what Germany's done. To John's point, Germany's gone sort of overboard and, insisting on 1.3 PUEs and then going down to 1.2, and they're insisting on heat reuse, etc. So the net effect of that was anybody who doesn't need to be in Germany won't be. They'll just drive people out. So the stick has worked really, really well. I'm not sure about the carrot. They need to invent the carrot.
So those data centres are moving to the UK. I mean,
So,
any other questions? Yeah.
but
This was 3 speakers, so is it 25?
It
Yeah,
was
we have to
25
bargain.
minutes, I apologize. Yeah, we don't have any more time for questions, but we want to give an applause to our speakers and anybody that wants to come up and ask more questions after the meeting.